On today's Encore podcast, we're going to bring philosophy out of its ivory tower and down to the street where it gets real. Miles Malenko, thanks for being with us today on this podcast for Encore's program.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. This is going to be a great day. If you're not a professional philosopher, you're a philosophy teacher, and in your spare time, you teach philosophy.
I guess something like that. I mean, one definition of a professional is somebody who makes money off of what they do, right? So I guess in that sense, I'm a professional, right? Perhaps.
But you've been doing this for like most of your life.
Well,
You've been studying philosophy and how to apply it to our real lives.
Yeah, I guess you could say most of my
Adult life?
Most of my adult life, yeah, I guess.
So let's get down to brass tacks right away. Like, what's the purpose of philosophy in the first place? Why do we do this?
Oh boy, why do we do this? How much time do we have?
As much time as you need, brother.
Okay, so a couple of hours. But no, why do we do it? I mean, that's a great question. That's a great philosophical question, right? Like, why do we philosophize, right? One definition that always stands out for me is the definition of philosophy itself, which was given by Wilfrid Sellars, who was a 20th century philosopher. And he basically said something like this, I'm paraphrasing, but he more or less said, like, the purpose or goal of philosophy is to figure out how things in the broadest possible sense hang together in the broadest possible sense.
There we go.
Now that sounds like a very almost non-definition, like, okay, wait, what are we trying to do? But yeah, we're trying to kind of figure it all out. We're trying to figure out what all this is, right? Like who we are, what we're doing here, how we got here, where we're going, where we've been, and what is all this stuff around us, right? And we're trying to figure out what all of that is and how it all hangs together and what our role and part in it all is and how to act and how to live, right?
So the big
small task.
Right, exactly. And some philosophers, I think they want to cover all the bases, and so they get into some pretty highfalutin language, and they want to be taken seriously, and they should be taken seriously, and they're trying to cover all of these things in the broadest possible sense. So they're covering every base, but really we can narrow this down to the big questions. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Why is this reality? You want to speak to that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, that goes back, I guess you can kind of go back to the ancient Greeks maybe. And,
sure.
How philosophy was divided, how those questions were divided up, right? Because you can ask about, let's say, ultimate reality, right? Like, what is reality, right? And there's a series of questions, or there's a universe of questions that speak to that, right? To that broad question, right? Like this microphone here, like, what is it made of? Well, we know it's made of, some kind of steel, some kind of, whatever else, felt or something, whatever we got here, wires and copper and plastic sheathing and all that. Well, that's all some kind of material substance, right, that we get from the earth. Well, then what's that made of, right? I mean, like they all kind of sound like almost childish kind of questions, right? It's like what children would ask, like, what's that? What's that? What is, but that's kind of what it is.
3-year-olds are sometimes the best philosophers because they ask the unanswered questions.
Yeah, and then watch the people whom they ask the question try to answer it.
Yes.
Right? Because sometimes they stumble. They go,
why is the sky blue?
Why is the sky blue, right? Like, well, I don't know. Like, if you don't know the answer to that, how are you going to answer, right?
Yeah, right.
So they really kind of test you, like, well, how much do you really know, right, as well? Right?
Exactly. And some of these philosophers get in, and they don't always agree with each other either.
Oh God, no. It's a what do I want to say? It's a professional prerequisite to disagree. Like, you can't agree. You've got to find some fault in the argument or in the something. Like, there's got to be something wrong here, right? Because the world is too big and too messy to make sense, to be defined in some small, very specific kind of way. Like there's probably something you're leaving out or forgetting or something, right?
Well, isn't that the if we're going back to the ancient Greeks, the classic split between Plato and Aristotle? Plato might have been the realm of ideas or the divine spark or the intangible part of us, and Aristotle, if I'm distilling it down properly, it was like, if I can't measure it or see it or touch it, it's not real.
I don't know if he's used those words, but but there is the famous painting.
A gross paraphrase. How's that?
You know what? He won't mind. But there is that famous painting, which I think is it? Boy, I'm probably going to mess this up, but I think it's the School of Athens by, oh boy, some painter, some famous. I don't want to.
We can Google it later.
We can Google it later. Yeah, but it's basically at the center, the focus of the painting are Aristotle and Plato, and Plato is has his arm pointing up like this, and Aristotle has his hand pointing down like this, and that sums up what you just said. Because Aristotle was saying, or I'm sorry, Plato is saying, ultimate reality is up there. It's out there someplace, right? It's these forms that never change throughout time. And Aristotle is saying, it's down here. It's what we experience and what we can see and touch and classify and categorize and make sense of. This is where we want to look for reality, not up there. And that is a perfect visual representation of what the difference in those philosophical, let's say, starting points are, let's say, right?
Exactly. Well, and each one of them contributed something valid to our life today.
Of course. Yeah.
The guy reaching down for what you can see and taste and touch and leads to that microphone. Right?
Yeah.
The grandfather of modern science, if you will, or great-grandfather, however far we want to take that back. Mm-hmm. And Plato, maybe not, well, yeah, sort of reaching up too, but our founding fathers of this country were very familiar. They were all had classical educations, and they were very familiar then with Plato's Republic.
Sure.
And this has a great influence on our current form of government that we're using today. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
I mean, boy, Plato's Republic, that's a big book. It covers everything. But no, I mean, I mean, probably one of the things that people that I've seen kind of bantied about lately, right, is this kind of, what Plato thought of democracy, right? He thought it was not the best form of government, right? Because he thought it was, he thought that democracy ultimately led to a demagogic kind of leader, and it kind of slides into some type of government that isn't democratic, basically, right? Because he, I mean, without getting too deep into it, but he's kind of thinking like, well, democracy is kind of supposed to be built up of the people, and people can be persuaded by arguments that are good or bad. And if they're bad arguments and you can persuade a lot of people, well, that's going to be bad. So we don't want that kind of government. Who do we want to lead? We want rule of the best. And who are the best?
The philosophers.
Philosopher kings, right? Well, like they should be on top of the pyramid, right?
Well, and you can sort of understand his point, because those are the people that stop and think about it. So when the child or the constituent or whatever says, "Why is the sky blue?" I've already thought this through, right? And so he even struggled with the practical applications, if I'm understanding it correctly. How do we remove this leadership from temptation? How do we remove the army protecting our republic from temptation? And he comes to the conclusion, I think, that you have to live a sort of a cloistered life if you're going to be in this role.
Yeah, I mean, Plato's Republic, Plato's ideal society is one that we could read today and think like, well, it sounds very rigid, and it sounds very, people are, at birth, they're almost selected to be in certain sectors of society, right? So from birth, without me having any say in it, I'm confined to be, I don't know, a merchant or a carpenter or something like that, right? Versus someone else, my friend, let's say, that's taken away and pushed off, and like he'd make a good military man or something, right? Without any any say from you really at all, kind of, right?
Well, and like the East Indian caste system historically started out as a division of labor, and then they got into the high and the mighty and the lowly and untouchable, and that didn't work out too well.
Yeah.
So I mean, so there's always these things that we can improve on from them, but they give us these great starting points, I think, to start working on it.
Yeah, and I mean, you could easily conceive of philosophy, I think, as this long running conversation or dialogue, really, right? So one generation, let's say, comes up with its own quote unquote truths, right? Like these are it, but then the one following closely behind gets to re-examine what the previous generation has said or thought or argued, and maybe some stuff stands, maybe some stuff doesn't, right? And that's, I mean, if you read the whole history, I mean, that would take you a very long time. But if you, I mean, you could do it, I guess, but if you really read it, it is an ongoing conversation, right? Because, people are, as much as we're the same in a way, like our nature is somewhat similar, somewhat stable, right? But the circumstances of life change, right? New technologies come up, new ways of being in the world, and new foods, right? I mean, with the discovery of things like the different fruits and vegetables that Europe or the old world, quote unquote, right, didn't know about, and that changes everything, right? So
or processed food,
or processed food, exactly, Cheese Whiz and stuff like that. Oh, can I say that? Is that
of course, potato chips and whatever, right? But and I think this is one of the great parts about philosophy is not everyone will agree on the ethics of it, but at the end of the day, right, when we have new technology, what are the ethics of it, right? One basic conversation that philosophers have is just because we are able to do something, should we do something? And I like our society right now is, right, hopefully preparing for this AI business. And I think you've touched on this in some of your classes, the ethics of how these things apply to our life.
That's correct. I started teaching a class this past spring on the philosophy of technology, right? Which is pretty much a kind of a broad survey of what philosophers have thought about technology, which I don't know, if it seems like they should have thought about it for quite a long time or not, but it's a relatively young discipline. Like they haven't been thinking about technology not philosophically anyway. It's kind of a funny story, but well, not funny, but not haha funny, but just kind of interesting, I guess. Which kind of begins in Aristotle, then goes kind of underground or doesn't really say much, and then it kind of reemerges in the 19th century or so. And that's when, if you think about what happened during that century, well, there was a boom of technology, right? There was the steam engine and steam power and,
the Industrial Revolution.
The Industrial Revolution, exactly.
And the conveyor belt and the mass production.
Which changed life, almost inconceivably from what it was prior to that, right? So that gave rise to a lot of these questions about, wow, like what are, where are we headed? What are we doing with all this technology, right? I mean, most of it, I can probably say it was probably pretty, I mean, yes, it was life-changing, but it was good, right? In the sense that, with lights now, right, you can, the day extended beyond just sunlight, right?
Yes.
Like back in the old days, right? When the sun went down, that was it, right? Well, now it didn't have to end, right?
We have 3 shifts a day now.
Artificial lights, exactly. Now we have 3. Now we can work 3 shifts instead of just 1. How inefficient is that, right?
That's right.
So that changes life, right? I mean, forever, and there's no going back, right?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Well, and so there are history books that talk about when the automobile was right first coming into its own, that people thought that this was going to be the end of civilization because these things are crazy and uncontrollable and nobody's and right, that leads to the invention of stoplights and all these other things. But aren't we sort of facing something similar now with AI? Right, it could be a very powerful tool for us, but right, if we don't approach it from a correct ethical or philosophical standpoint, it could be very disastrous for us.
Oh boy, AI is one of those really technologies in its infancy, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot. I mean, if you've perused the internet or read an article or something, you will find an avalanche of stuff about AI, right? Like from the AI boosterism that says it's going to cure everything and it's going to make us all happy and, whatever, to the doomsday of like it's going to wipe out civilization. It's going to wipe out humanity, right? And yeah, probably both extremes are not true.
Well, the automobile didn't wipe out humanity.
Well, not yet. Give it time. It's only about 100 years old.
Fair enough. You put automobiles and AI together. Maybe now we're...
Boy. Well, I mean, that's what they're talking about, right?
Sure, of course.
Self-driving cars and that kind of thing. I mean, there's some out there, right? There's
if it comes into its own, it's going to affect the insurance industry. It's going to affect the medical industry. It's going to, I mean, it is filled with wonderful potential.
Sure. Life-changing.
Yes.
Once again, right? Because if there is an accident, right? If there is, I mean, the whole premise and goal is that it's going to be accident-free because most accidents are caused by human error, right? People staring at their phones or not paying attention or whatever, right?
Right.
But if there is an accident, well, who do you blame? If the driver, quote unquote, isn't driving, isn't controlling the vehicle, well, then how are they to blame, morally speaking, or even legally, right?
Exactly.
Legally, like, is it the software that's driving this vehicle, like through the streets, right? Is it the manufacturer or is it the programmers who wrote the software? I mean, you get a bunch of crazy questions then. Right?
That's it. And these are the ethical and philosophical concerns that, if not us, then our children and grandchildren will be having
probably
to deal with. You also have a class that I had the privilege to attend, and most of the time I don't get to attend other people's classes. But
me too. I don't get to attend.
I was just absolutely. I don't know what's the best word. Like, I was flabbergasted in the best sense of the way of your explanation of Stoic philosophy. And I wonder if you'd speak to that for a little bit.
Sure.
It's kind of having a little renaissance.
Oh my God. Yeah. Isn't it? Especially, I think, I mean, I kind of got into it maybe about 7-8 years ago or so. I kind of rediscovered it. I mean, I kind of studied it in college.
Sure.
But I rediscovered it, like I said, about 7 or 8 years ago. And even then, I discovered that there was a kind of a little bit of a renaissance or something going on. Like, people had become reinterested in it again. And there were books, like contemporary books, being published about Stoic philosophy. And I thought, what is going on here, And I got into it.
Just to interrupt for just a second, like when we hear the word Stoic today, it has a slightly different meaning than the classical sense of the word. So
sure, yeah. There's I've heard it described as capital S Stoicism and lowercase s Stoicism, right? The lowercase Stoicism is when we say someone is stoic in battle or something like that, right?
They're not showing any outward.
Yeah, they're not, keep the stiff upper lip kind of thing,
Very
like
British.
Those guys, very British, yes. And there's the capital S, and the capital S is really referencing that body of, I don't know, let's call it wisdom or something like that, which is Stoic philosophy, right? Which is derived from the ancient Greek schools and ancient Roman schools, I should say, as well. And is in experiencing a kind of renaissance, it's kind of not exactly that, because there's, it's obviously 2,000 years later, right? So some of the things that the Stoics taught back then about the reality of the universe in a physical sense is probably not exactly accurate. It doesn't line up with our theory of atoms and molecules and matter and everything else, right? Fair enough.
Nobody's perfect.
No, nobody's perfect. That's right. But ethically speaking, about kind of what is the goal of life, basically, right? And what is the goal of social living and, all of those kinds of things. There are a lot of really interesting insights that the Stoics had thousands of years ago, right? That people are finding use for today. They're kind of reapplying it in 21st century in the 21st century world, really, right?
Well,
which is fascinating. Right?
This is exactly what impresses me about you is you take these high-minded ideas and you make them real. And this is right when I was so favorably impressed in your class was when you made the example, right, of the Serenity Prayer.
Oh, right.
And tell me how the Serenity Prayer encapsulates Stoicism or vice versa.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, so the Serenity Prayer is basically, and maybe you can correct me here if I get it wrong, but it's God grant me the serenity to
accept the things I can't change.
Accept the things I can't change. Have courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
That's a beautiful prayer.
It's a beautiful prayer, and it sums things up very, very nicely and neatly, but it also kind of sums up an expression of Stoic philosophy, right?
Yes.
And without going too deep into it, I think here, but the philosopher Epictetus had a saying, basically, he didn't call it this, but subsequent people have called it this, but they've called it the dichotomy of control, right?
Yes.
And he basically splits the world up into things that you have control over and things that you do not have control over. And
the weather.
And that's the first, I mean, that's half of that Serenity Prayer, right?
Right.
So the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Those are things that are not in my control. And I really shouldn't worry about them, right? Then there are things that you can control. That's the dichotomy. And that's what the Serenity Prayer asks for courage there, right? Because you need courage, and courage is one of the virtues of one of the ancient Greek virtues, but also one of the Stoic virtues too, right? So having the courage to change the things that you can change, impact the things that you can, and then of course wisdom to know the difference between those two. And you can spend a lifetime trying to figure out what you can and can't control, right?
Right.
And you're never kind of done with it.
And
right?
one of the prime examples I think that we as a society might apply that is I can change my behavior, but I really can't change how other people think about me.
No, right.
I could set an example, but that doesn't mean that they're going to believe that I've changed.
No, right. And even other people, like you can't, you can't really control other people. I mean, you can, but it shades into some other areas that we don't want to talk about.
Humanity has tried it. It never works
out, does it? Yeah, right. There's something in us that no, we don't want to be controlled, right?
That's it.
We want to make our own decisions, right? So, yeah, that's...
And Stoicism, right, it started out as a Greek school, as you pointed out, but it really comes into its own under the Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius. You want to comment a little bit about him?
Well, probably, I'd venture to say the most well-known Stoic work, right?
Yes.
Which was meant not as, he didn't write that as a book to be published. It was basically his journals. It was basically him writing to himself, reminding himself that he should do, X, Y, and Z, that he should, keep his anger in check, that he should, do any number of things that are virtuous, right? Or that he should embody those virtues, those Stoic virtues that he learned from his own teachers, right? So it's kind of him reminding himself to do that.
A little bit like you're doing with some of your classes. What's the application in real life here? And now we have Plato's philosopher king.
Not me.
No, but maybe Marcus Aurelius.
Maybe it's Marcus Aurelius, definitely. Yes, definitely.
I think Plato would be impressed with that guy. No?
Well, you know what? Yeah, I mean, he might be. He didn't talk sufficiently about the form, so he might have,
Yeah, they might have disagreed on
Yeah, they
on
might
some
have
things.
disagreed about that. But certainly, I mean, I can't think of any other example from the ancient world or even, you know, much beyond that about, you know, somebody, some real person, some real historical person who has embodied that ideal of the philosopher king.
There we go.
Better than him.
Miles, thanks for being here today. This has been an awesome session.
Well, thanks for having me again. This was fun.
Oh yeah, we'll have to come back and continue our conversation, and also I want to talk about some of your other classes that are a little lighter, your travel logs and so on and so forth. So
a little bit lighter.
We'll do that on a different podcast.
Sounds good.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
See you.
All right.